Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is a show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finished audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 12th of March, 2019, we are beginning the second in the Fourth Doctor Lost Stories box set. A story specifically placed in the middle of just at the beginning of the Graham-Williams era, The Valley of Death. Now, it's placed here because The Valley of Death is actually written by past Doctor Who producer Philip Hinchcliffe. And again, this is a story that you sort of start out with, and you sort of get a feeling that this is where the show would have gone had Hinchcliffe stayed on in his role as producer. You would have had a story about, just a story about, in general, sort of a heisty type thing. The Valley of Death concerns, a professor who has went missing and without a trace 70-something years ago. And now it's the 1970s, and his grandson wants to follow his path in the name of science to try to find his grandfather, because somehow his journal survived. Of course, the real question is the journal real? Turns out it is real. But yeah, that is a question mark, because it was taken from from a South American tribe, to like an antiques dealer, where the grandson ended up purchasing it. And it's sort of this interesting story, comedy of errors. This first episode is pretty much all set up. A lot of the first half takes place in this lecture. There's like this lecture from the leader of the expedition, basically saying, "Yeah, we're gonna map out his course, and we're gonna see if we can find any trace of him. Let's try to see what happened." And then, what's odd is they're going to a place called basically the Bermuda Triangle of the Amazon, because a bunch of planes apparently crash and burn when it comes to exploring this area of the jungle. There's sort of that great spirit of adventure of things crashing and burning, which is just, it's weird. It's a bit of a weird story overall. First episode impressions go, it's kind of a slow start, because we get to the Amazon tribe, the plane, the Dr. Leela, and then this journalist Valerie Carlton, and our main sort of expedition leader get in, ends up crashing in the Bermuda, it's sort of in the forest, because he was also trying to find the city of the Megars, a lost city made of gold. It's sort of playing on the old, let's find El Dorado, sort of doing an Indiana Jones-esque type thing. And the big centerpiece of this episode is a plane crash, which is, very well portrayed. But then you get into the jungle where you have, you really do get a chance for some alien designs. Like, you have, like, a tarantula that's enormous and terrifying, which is, a good action scene. And then by the time you actually get to meet the grandfather, turns out he's the tribe of a bunch of South American Amazons. Which is just weird. They put him in charge, and he also hasn't aged at all in the past 70 years. So the Doctor realizes something's going wrong. And it's about at this point where the episode stops, because we realize that there's some sort of alien out there. We don't really know what this alien creature character is yet, but we do get enough to be like, oh, there is something weird going on here. We now have, this is our plot. We know that something weird's going on, and with the weirdness occurring, we have to have a decent chance for, just sort of for the story to continue from there. So what else happens? Some other interesting things happen, and this episode is really, really good. You get a real sense of the Doctor and Liz, again, camaraderie. They're still really close friends. You get this nice sense of sort of, this is a more adventurous story. Yay, we're having fun and doing fun things with adventures. And not just doing the and not just necessarily doing it's a standard horror story. We're playing up it plays up the adventure aspect, and playing up the adventure aspect, you just sort of it allows Tom Baker and Louise Jameson to really sort of do some different, make some different action choices, and they get to have a sort of a fun, different story. Um, you know, not and not really get anything, sort of, anything, nothing goes wrong. It's a really, it's a fun start. Maybe it's a little slow, especially because this is only 4 episodes long. So, I'm gonna give The Valley of Death Part 1 a 9 out of 10. It is the 13th of March 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 2 of The Valley of Death. Now, Part 2 of The Valley of Death, I have to say, is interesting when compared to Part 1, because, again, I said one of the biggest problem, the minor issues with the first episode was the fact that it kind of was an episode that, didn't entirely know what it wanted to be, and kind of got to a slow start. But Part 2 almost is an episode that takes us out of the titular Valley of Death by the end. We basically get some background on Cornelius Perkins and how he made a deal with this alien Godwin that basically to set up like all these traps, because the Doctor and Valerie Carlton save themselves from falling off of a cliff, because there was from Perkins's plane at the very beginning of the episode, whereas Leela and Edward Perkins, the grandson of Cornelius Perkins, have to fight off a spider. They're all sort of tests to see are these characters worthy, and basically the idea is that you know there's this idea that this interesting idea that Godwin sort of needs to know if technology advances enough, and he's going to let Cornelius go. He's basically kept him prisoner, kept him young, but he can't actually take him back to his original time period, which is an interesting sort of conceit. Like, he realizes, yeah, I don't have time travel capabilities, I can't get you back, but you can live a new life, basically, in the 1970s. And then, he's also like the last of his kind. We're sort of playing off the possible last of your species sort of idea. So you have, something that the Doctor is at least partially sympathetic to, even though he doesn't actually recognize the species. Again, it sort of plays on the Doctor doesn't know everything sort of trope. He knows some things, but he doesn't know all the ins and outs of this species, of the Magar, of the tribe, and a lot of the episode is just building up the idea of the culture before leaving. Like, the big cliffhanger reveal is that they've been gone for 2 months, because they sort of were put in this localized time field. Now, there's also this sort of interesting aspect that Godwin he's obviously the villain of the piece. Like, the audience gets to know that, and the Doctor and Leela don't entirely trust him overall, which kind of makes sense, because, why would the Doctor and Leela trust this random character who, claims to want to help them, but, he can't actually prove that he wants to help. He's one of the characters who's just sort of, he's almost in it for himself. He's not in it to be like, yes, I wanted to help humanity, and I only have altruism as my end goal, and ideas like that. Like, he's a very, he just wants to get home. He allows Cornelius Perkins to take gold from the city of the Magars, basically to live rich. It's sort of like now turn the other way, whilst we get out of here. it's he's obviously it's pretty obvious that he has double motives. There's also just that big reveal that they made it. Um, they made it out, and it's so much later than it initially was. Like so much time has passed. There's just there's this sense that everything is different now. That they are in a different we've made it to a different period of time of history. Time marches on while whilst our characters sort of attempt to stay. They're not even attempting to stay in the past. They're just attempting to stay in what amounts to the present. Like it's not. It's a story where you have the characters basically being locked up, um, and sort of set out of time. You get this real sense of danger here that all of our characters may not actually get to have a happy ending. They may not. It builds up the tension. It's I mean, a perfect continuation for the story. Jonathan Morris is the one who adapts the script here, and he does an excellent job. Sort of making you feel like, okay, this is most definitely something weird that's going on here. We need to figure out what this is, what this all means overall, and really where we can go from here. Like what do we have to do to try to fix everything? Because we can't live with, we can't just live with, we can't just live like this. We have to figure out what does Godwin actually want, because he's very obviously trying to invade. So overall, I'm going to give The Valley of Death Part 2 a 10 out of 10. It is still the 13th of March 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 3 of The Valley of Death. What's interesting about Part 3 of The Valley of Death is that despite the cover sort of having a temple on it and still having sort of the jungly green theme, the rest of the story actually takes place either in London or on the spaceship of the mothership of the Lovors, which is Godrin's species. So it's sort of an interesting sort of idea, because Part 3 is an episode where the entire plot just sort of shifts away from the sort of let's do crazy archaeology in the jungle and have, let's do an Indiana Jonesy type plot with, the characters, making stuff like Cornelius Perkins sort of disappears for he sort of disappears in this episode. He really doesn't have much more to do with the story. He's kind of written out, and the story itself becomes sort of an interesting little mix between the Claws of Axos and the android invasion. So the big plot of this episode starts with this rather interesting, like Godwin, once they land, he gets into a taxi and goes to the BBC television center to hijack a broadcast right before what it's one of those like little, there's one of those, it's got a continuity announcer like, oh, next like later tonight you'll have this show, but right now Part 3 of the new of the current serial of cut into the broadcast, in sort of this idea that kind of echoes this famous Chicago incident where during, I think, like Part 3 of Horror of Fang Rock, the previous story, someone hacked in to the Chicago Broadcasting Network in like a Max Headroom mask. It's a really creepy incident that no one's ever actually figured out who was behind it. But this episode it's almost playing reference to that, which I think is actually quite funny. Also, just like the taxi driver's, sort of reaction to who Godwin is, like, oh, you're an actor. It's obvious after a while that you're an actor. You're dressed up in a mask because you act, and that is your purpose. You do that. You do the acting thing. He's a very, very sort of this nice little banter. But yeah, a lot of the episode just sort of shifts between the Claws of Axos and the android invasion as like this story. Everyone on the ship gets duplicates. Uh, Edward Perkins and Leela are captured and basically used as a body print for like just to have for the human male and female, um, which is actually kind of a shame because that means Leela doesn't get much to do in this episode, and honestly, that's a real shame because Leela's one of the best companions. She's a really good character, and just sort of shoving her into the corner doesn't really work well for the story. It sort of is like, oh, well, we were going to do something with her, but then we just sort of shoved her away for a while, and we're gonna they almost forget about her existence, which just doesn't work like that. Now you kind of need to have Leela at the front and center of everything for this story, and really for any story to work. She works well with the Doctor. She doesn't get much to do, even though she's actually on the cover. Again, the cover of the disc for parts 3 and 4. It's one of those just odd things. Like the Legars basically they're like, yes, we need it. We would like you to come onto our ship because we can give you medicine and science and give you fuel sources. So you won't have to rely on fossil fuels or nuclear energy. You can completely renewable fuel source, medicine far in advancement of your own. We will be benevolent, but of course they want to take over the world, and they basically make copies of everything else. Again, this is something that, honestly, if you've been watching Doctor Who, you've seen before. I will say, the copy thing, the Android thing, it actually works better on audio because, well, one, they don't try to do the silent thing, and they don't try to make it a twist. They also have, the Doctor already initially suspicious of just everything. That's like, you really don't want to be the savior, quote unquote, savior of humanity, do you? No, you have a more sinister purpose underneath. Don't try to fool us, because this is still Doctor Who. The Doctor still realizes, yeah, that's pretty sinister. You're not the sanest, most well-rounded people. You have a sort of this sinister streak, and you know what? I don't blame the Doctor because it makes sense that they're so sinister, and it really does make sense. But like again, a lot of this episode just seems to be we are ripping off the Claws of Axos and the android invasion without any real meaning to. Like there isn't anywhere much left to go with it. You've got the idea there, and the ideas are solid, and they have it's quite a bit of fun with the ideas, but they're just they need a little more time to breathe, a little more time to move around, and honestly some time to basically just give us a good solid story. So and I don't quite know where part 4 is going to go, because part 3 is just this sort of odd, we're transitioning and we don't quite know where we're going with this. It's definitely a step down. It's probably even the weakest episode of the story so far, like many penultimate episodes. But it does at least give us a nice cliffhanger, and it's not a bad episode. It has just a couple of minor little flaws that really need to be worked out if the story is going to continue. So I'm going to give The Valley of Death Part 3 an 8 out of 10. It is the 16th of March, 2019, and I just finished listening to Part 4 of The Valley of Death. Yes, this is coming out quite late, and I do apologize for that. Life just kind of got really busy at the moment for no reason. So it decided, I wasn't able to actually finish it until very recently. Now, Part 4 of The Valley of Death actually finishes the story out decently, with a decent, strong enough ending. As a story, it does sort of that weird thing where it's like, only Godryn is actually evil, and our heroes eventually work out the rest of the species to their side, and they all agree to leave peacefully, Bit of a cop-out ending, and then for some reason, Valerie Carlton and Edward Perkins, they both decide we're gonna go with them and not live on Earth. They're also in love. honestly, their romance seems to have come out of nowhere. It's like, let's just pair these two off, because why not? Um, which is just kind of it's just a weird little like, oh, we're pairing off characters because I guess it's because the day we're ending with the letter Y or something. Um, but that being said, there really isn't much. Uh, there really isn't much. Um, there isn't too much done in this story to like really validate. Really, the characters aren't necessarily validated as characters. They're just sort of like, oh, we kind of have, we kind of have this had this relationship. It's just like, oh, okay, that was a thing. Um, the way that actually Godrun gets defeated is quite clever, and there's a lot there that perhaps could have been executed at least a little bit better than what it was. But other than that, Tom Baker and Louise Jameson were both great in their roles. Um, Anthony Howell and Jane Slavin were great in their roles. And a lot of the actors really gave good performances. And gave us kind of a real fun sort of adventure type story. Though I think Philip Hinchcliffe kind of missed a trick because like the rest of the story takes place in London, and yeah, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of it is very much a have you heard of you guys remember Android Invasion? You guys remember Terror of the Zygons? Um, yeah, have you seen those two stories? You've seen the end of this story. It's not as original an ending as perhaps it could have been. It perhaps needed maybe another rewrite to get the final sort of like the final bit of the you know the final sort of episode working where it could actually be almost have given us a perfect ending, because as it stands now, it really isn't that perfect ending you may have been looking for. I mean, you're still probably gonna have a good time if you if you listen to this one, because it's most definitely worth it. It's got Tom Baker in it, and he's great, and Louise Jameson is also great. It's got good acting, and it's got a decent enough plot. It just doesn't quite finish itself out, perhaps as good as it really, anywhere near as good as it really could have, because you're kind of hoping for a big, a really big a really big finale for the story, and it really just doesn't. It just doesn't deliver on sort of the best parts of what could have been for the story. It's it basically it needs to be it needs to be have been worked on a little more, perhaps, and given just maybe a couple more rewrites here and there, and with that we could have actually gotten a really really solid ending, and had some really fun solid characters. That being said, I'd still say it's a pretty good. It's a really good episode. It's don't get me wrong. It's enjoyable. So I'm going to give The Valley of Death Part 4 an 8 out of 10. That being said, we add up the scores and average it out to give The Valley of Death a final score of 8.75 out of 10. Thank everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I always like to hear from people. Did you like the story? Give me your thoughts in the comments down below. And join me next time when the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon returns with the second televised story of Season 15, and the first story to feature one of the most famous companions, K9 in The Invisible Enemy.